everybody. This is Dorothy, your host, and we are back with another amazing episode. Today, I am so excited to bring on Li-Da Kruger. She was born in Cambodia, adopted to the UK just before the Khmer Rouge took over and won the Civil War in April 1975. She is a producer and director of two documentaries that are both about her adoption experience and her search. One called Belonging, which was showed on the History Channel in 2003, and Prue Leith, Journey with My Father, which was showcased on Channel 4. For over 20 years, she has been trying to find out who her parents were and what had happened to them. Due to this passion that she has had through her experience, she is also the founder of Reconnecting Cambodia, an organization that uses DNA testing to help Cambodian families find their biological families after the war, which I feel like is so needed. There are so many parts of society that the war has torn apart, family included. And so she is definitely championing that. She has been a powerful voice for sharing the raw truth of the Cambodian diaspora experience. Li-Da, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Dorothy, for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Thank you. So I will say, I think you are one of the first Cambodian people that I've had from the UK. And this is so exciting because I love bringing in different perspectives. I love to start off by talking about your childhood and how you grew up. So you were adopted by the famous Bake Off chef, Prue Leith. Talk to me about your experience growing up as an adoptee. I know it's a loaded question, but the struggle that you had with your identity, was it a struggle? And also, what was it like growing up with parents who were kind of on a stage and under a lens?
Gosh, that is, it's a big question, but a lot of people ask, is it all right to ask this question? And I've chosen, because I feel so lucky to be adopted, to be very open about my adoption. I think it's really important. And I don't know, we'll get to there later, but part of the reason I do the documentaries is to really explore this idea of identity. And to be honest, I grew up like a little English blonde princess, or that's certainly what I wanted to be. And I know it's very controversial, but I can honestly also say that I felt and still am dealing with some of those issues like a coconut. Like I felt very white inside because that was my upbringing. Like I had a white family and most of my friends were white, although I had quite a few brown friends as well, probably because we gravitated towards each other at school or in the playground. But no, I had to compare, in contrast to the sort of the horror story of Cambodia and my early life, I had this perfect fairy tale happy ending in England. That's how I felt it was like. We talked openly about it as a family, that I was saved from genocide and I was saved from a war. So these are all positive plus points, and my parents and my brother, we talked about it endlessly. So in that sense, I felt very lucky. I felt very blessed. But on the flip side, I always felt very guilty. I felt this sense of irrational kind of survivor's guilt. And even now, when I have talked as a survivor of the Cambodian genocide, some people understandably say, but you didn't go through Pol Pot. And I say, well, no, I didn't. But by the fact I escaped, I am a survivor, and that is my unique perspective, I suppose, in that sense, or that's what I know. But I grew up in England as an English girl. I went to boarding school. I rode horses. I played croquet. In fact, I think I grew up in the village where they created croquet. So I had green lawns. I had a beautiful house. Yes, very English. And I had a wonderful childhood. I really had a wonderful childhood. But again, that survivor's guilt, that I was aware that if my parents, my Cambodian parents, had survived, I would have been in massive contrast, because as I grew up on, my mother did actually save me John Pilger's films, documentaries, and that was the first time I really was introduced to the horrors of the Khmer Rouge regime.
do you remember the earliest recollection of you kind of questioning and or learning about really the Khmer Rouge War?
Honestly, I think I always knew about it, but it was when I sort of hit 14, I think, when I made the decision to make my first documentary. I wanted to actually understand what it all meant and not just kind of talk about the fairy tale ending to a horror story, because that I had stood on stage at school and talked about how I'd been saved and talked about Angkor Wat, but this was the sort of paradox. Like, Cambodia is this beautiful, beautiful country and got this ancient civilization, and with Angkor, then on the flip side, so much death, so much suffering, so much nothing in between. And because it was the 70s, 80s, there was no information or very little, and it came out slowly. And I was a child, and the internet didn't exist and all those things. It was a slow sort of development from this is my story, aren't I lucky, to, oh, people keep asking me, where are you really from? And I knew what they meant and I could play with it. But then it was like, okay, I've got to actually understand where I'm really from to be able to really, well, I felt like what's the word? I felt a bit like an imposter, I suppose. I didn't understand. So that spurred me on to sort of explore that part of my identity more.
Yeah. And I think that absolutely makes sense. I mean, you are not the first adoptee that I have had on this podcast. And I feel like it is she grew up in France, and so her adoptee parents are French. And she had a great childhood growing up. And I think it's not the first time that I had heard that there are many adoptees who are fully aware that their story is unlike others and it could have been very much worse. And that survival guilt that you kind of carry with yourself as a child, it's strange, right? You didn't suffer the way that many people in Cambodia did, but yet the mere fact that you survived and got out of it unscathed makes you feel as if, oh my gosh, I am so, so, so lucky. And so you said it was right around 14 that you really, really you made the decision that you were going to create a documentary. That's quite young, to be honest.
It was weird. I had this sort of sit up in bed moment. I'd obviously been thinking about my identity, and I can't remember the exact lead up, but it was obviously around that time when I needed to do something and concrete. So I decided that I didn't know I was going to make a documentary, but I knew I was going to document it. I knew I was going to go on this journey, and I didn't quite know how I was going to do it. But it was that moment of, right, I need to actually address this issue because I'm not English, clearly. I had to look at myself in a mirror when I was small to remind myself that I'm actually Cambodian. But what on earth does that mean? What does all that? So I entered the TV industry on the advice of a film director friend who I said, look, I want to make a film. I want to educate myself, other people about Cambodia, about adoption. Maybe there's lots of other people out there that might benefit from this, because that's the other thing. I grew up with no Cambodians in my life whatsoever. Like, I think my mother did try, and because of the internet and because communication was just so much harder unlike today, that it was very difficult to find any Cambodian community. And we were all, and still are, very spread out around the UK. And actually, there's very few Cambodians in this country. I think about 10,000. But so even now, it's a very small number. They said, rather than do feature film, do a documentary, because the turnover is much quicker. So that's why I entered the TV industry in 2000, the year 2000. Yeah.
When you were growing up, what were some of the ways, and I think that's an interesting point that you brought up, but what were some of the ways that your mother and your parents did the very best they could? Obviously, I mean, if you're growing up with no Cambodians around you, what were some of the struggles that your mom had to deal with, and what were the ways that she tried her best to kind of combat that? If she could, if she had the resources.
Yes. I mean, she talks about being approached quite often. And we did stick out as a family. But in my documentary, she tells a very sort of funny, I'm not sure it's the right word, but I laughed at it, a story about how she was ready to say, well, to someone saying you shouldn't take a child away from their culture. Well, actually, Li-Da came from a country of genocide, and they actually said, oh, well done, because she's actually quite plain. So it was all sorts of sort of strange assumptions as a baby being a different color. It's amazing what people will come up and say, a whole range of things. But my mother's very practical, and she has no filter, which is great in some ways. So she would always stand up for me, but she did try and connect me with my culture, but it was just really difficult at that time. As I said, she saved documentaries that John Pilger made back in the 80s. He was one of the first journalists back into the country after the Khmer Rouge regime fell or was pushed back.
I can imagine how difficult it could be to try to grow up in a space. I mean, even here in the US, and I am in the Bay Area, there is a huge Cambodian community. But even then, unless you grew up within the centralized area of where that pocket is, I don't think there were many Cambodians in my high school. And everyone has their own journey of identity. And so, yeah, I wanted to kind of give an ode to your mom. It's hard. It's hard to kind of struggle with those kind of questions, and that constantly you get pinned with constantly. You had made the decision that, yes, this has become something that I need to dive into and I need to document it somehow. At what age? I mean, after 14, what was that journey like? And when did you officially start realizing, okay, I think film is the medium that I want to get into?
To be honest, I can't remember the exact moment I realized it was film, but I think at 14, I realized film was a very powerful medium. It's something we all watched and enjoyed and entertained ourselves and learned things from. So it was always going to be film or documentary. But I think I delayed it because then I was 14. I delayed it a little bit because it's such a massive undertaking. Like even then I realized I had to do it before that generation of people died, because I actually got my story from being handed down to me from the lady that organized my adoption, to the first family that were going to adopt me that got me out of Cambodia, to then the next family because his wife died. It's really complicated, my story. Anyway, this other family then were going to adopt me. And then finally, my mum, Prue, and her husband adopted me once I was already over here. And to go back quickly to the point about my mum, I think because she didn't physically get me from Cambodia, she admits it was just much easier to say, wow, we've got this lovely baby. I've done my bit in trying to find some connection to her cultural roots, but it's almost impossible. So we'll talk about it. And she did her best, I think, but she has admitted that she could have done better. In terms of doing better, she could have contacted the woman that got me out of Cambodia, because now, sadly, that lady is dead. And when I started searching for her in 99, which is when it was pre-documentary, but I'd started the search. I was old enough, I had enough funds to actually start traveling on my own. But it was such an emotional Pandora's box, I guess, that I had put it off until, right, okay, I'm going to do it now. And I've got to do it now because people are going to die. And just at that moment, I discovered that who the lady was, who was the gatekeeper to my story, I suppose. I discovered she'd died 6 months earlier. And she was actually a very famous woman within the refugee world and had been very well known as an expat in Cambodia. And I'd love to make a feature film out of her. She knew John le Carré, and it's a whole other world that I think Elizabeth Becker knows this lady, Yvette Pierre-Paoli. I can't wait to talk to her about that as well. Whenever I get the chance to meet her, it was always going to be film. It's a powerful medium. And I think since then as well, I have veered towards filmmaking because it is such a vehicle for social change and impact.
Yeah. I want to go back a little bit there. There's something that stood out to me just as you were on this journey of rediscovery. What was your soul mission? Was it to reconnect and figure out who you were or who you are at the time? or was it also driven by maybe a need to find out your real parents? Some adoptees don't have that interest, some do. You call it a Pandora's box, which is, I would imagine, is exactly what that is, right? Because you don't know what you're going to find when you start that journey. So, what was the exact mission that you felt like you were on? And were you scared?
I was terrified, but at the same time, I was driven by such a need to do it. And it was identity. And actually, it was this need to belong to a world that I had no idea about as well. I realized I had this dual identity, but I had no idea about one side of it. In my first documentary called Belonging, I remember thinking, it opens with me, what does the Cambodian blood in my veins mean? I mean, it's literally foreign. I'm surrounded by English Cotswold countryside, and I know nothing about Cambodia. It was important for me, and also because I didn't know my story. Like, my mother has a brilliant tendency to tell a good story, and I didn't know how much of the story she had heard and given to me was sort of made up. So the line was that I escaped Cambodia days before the Khmer Rouge took power, and the last American helicopter pilot, which kinds of all, now I know the history now, it kind of fits in with the whole sort of Operation Baby Lift and everything. However, it was through Yvette who happened to be running the only transport planes at the time, kind of thing. So I didn't know what the truth was. And interestingly, John Pilger, I did track him down to ask his advice, because he was my kind of encyclopedia in terms of Cambodian history at that time. And he said, when you go, it was a brilliant bit of advice. He said, try and find something concrete from your past, because basically, without knowing if anything about my past was true, and that was what I was setting out to find out, it's like my past didn't exist. I just didn't exist. Cambodia didn't exist. My Cambodian parents didn't exist. And even now, as a 51-year-old woman, I still really struggle with identifying and connecting with my Cambodian birth parents. I've connected with the country because I've worked on it in the last 25 years. But that connection to Cambodian blood is still a real struggle. But yes, I needed to find something concrete from my past to make it real, to validate my Cambodian existence.
Do you feel the need to continue finding your blood parents, or is that something that is just not really necessary?
Well, I think it goes through stages. Like, when I first discovered, when I went to Cambodia, I met one of the nurses of the psychiatric hospital that I ended up in through my mother. I met him and he said, I made up all your information. And then suddenly, the little information that I had less than I started out with. So suddenly I'm sort of Jane Doe, I suppose. So I sort of made my peace with that. I thought, okay, even if my names are made up, even if I'm never going to find out who my birth parents are, I have the name I've been given. So I was never going to change my name, even if I got married. Well, I am married and I didn't change my name. It is my name. So I've held on to I've found my own identity in that sense. Then I sort of made my peace with it. But it was only when I wanted to start adopting or having children myself, and we ended up adopting because I always wanted to adopt to honour my experience. And also I felt it was a kind of duty, because there are children that need homes, that I realize if I didn't know the glaring gaps in my own family history, my own children would have gaps in their heritage as well. So I realized at that point, it's not just about me, it's about my children, their children.
It seems like it goes in waves. It depends on the day. It depends on
It depends on the waves, depends on the day. And also, yes, so young person, definitely got to grips with that. Much later, 20 years later, I want to adopt. I realize I need to find out names. And then with the DNA, I realized that actually it is possible. I never thought it was possible. So it's amazing how through my life it has gone totally up and down. And I thought it doesn't matter, but it does matter. I think once you're on that journey, it does matter. I just had made my peace with it. And when I talked to people about, like, the woman I met on my second journey, She had made her peace with having lost her daughter, and she was 77 at the time. And I said, but I can, if you take a DNA test, I can help you. If you're interested, I can get your DNA on, and we can maybe find your daughter. And she was really excited about that. So I think you make your peace with it. But if DNA does offer real hope that we didn't have before, this technology existed.
These are all kind of the reasons why you have created the programs that you've created. And I would imagine dealing with those waves, depending on what stage of life you're in, is one of the hardest things about being an adoptee, right? I'm not one myself, but I would imagine just one day it's this, and then the next day you're like, oh, this feels so difficult. And then you make your peace with it. And then the next day you're like, no, but it's still really important to me. And would you say that is one of the most challenging things about being an adoptee?
I would actually say it's not, but only in the sense that for me, finding my birth parents is about my need for belonging and identity. And I think other adoptees I know don't feel that need to find their birth parents. Maybe they found their identity through other means. Maybe because the other side of my dual identity, the English British side, is so strong that I feel I need to balance it better. But also, I'm sure you and a lot of people I've spoken to, but certainly from my point of view, I can't see my life through any other lens than being a survivor of the Khmer Rouge. And I think I obviously have to accept that, but I think I'm trying to find ways to see it in another way, in a more positive way, or in a purposeful way, I suppose. And making films has helped with exploring my own identity, but also exactly, it's sort of rebuilding or reconstructing my own Cambodian identity. But I love my British identity. And anyway, I think one's identity is something that we all, wherever we come from, are all not struggling with, but all question ourselves about, because it is an evolving thing and we are influenced at different stages of our life. And interesting, I had a conversation with one of your other podcast guests, Amara Girl. I was asking her why she was so interested in giving back and identity, and because a lot of people are not interested, and there's no judgment on that. It's just they're doing this, and we didn't really come to a conclusion, but it was interesting how some people, it depends what you're driven by, and I'm certainly driven by this need to finally find meaning and purpose in what I'm doing. And I don't know whether that is a typical kind of survivor's guilt kind of position or an adoptee's position, or I'm constantly trying to say, why was I adopted? Out of all these people, why was I the one that was adopted? And then, oh gosh, I've got this whole Cambodian thing going on as well. I mean, that's a massive sort of thing on its own. I just think it's part of my particular journey of understanding who I am and why I'm on this planet.
Yeah. It clearly shows you are so passionate about being on this healing journey, and out of it has come 2 documentaries. The first one being Belonging, right? And then the second one being Journey with My Daughter, Prue Leith. So talk to me a little bit about both of those. First one came out in 2003 and the second one came out in 2020, which is quite recent. What was the process like in getting to both of those documentaries? What was the foundation and the basis for both of those?
The first one, Belonging, that was more, I just have to say, I didn't direct them. I produced them, and they're kind of authored pieces, but I produced the first one and produced the second one. But the first one, as I mentioned earlier, it was kind of the need to document this sort of exploration of who I am. And interestingly, the word belonging, the title Belonging, only came afterwards. I didn't realize that's what I was doing at the time, but it was my first. I had been to Cambodia actually before I went back in '94, and that was an extraordinary time because I went on my own, and I visited the killing fields, and because there were no tourists, it was really quite literally found as it had, left as it had been found kind of thing. So this was kind of a focused journey to really understand how much of the story had been handed down to me was true, and also what had happened to Cambodia, what had happened to my parents. That was the sort of mission. But what I discovered was that it was more, that was the mission, but my journey, I suppose, was I felt like such an imposter to begin with. I felt people saw me as Cambodian, but I felt so English. I felt so British, sort of coming along and asking these really massive questions about very Western conceits, I suppose, like justice. And so I felt very much a fish out of water until I was being accepted when Cambodians I met sort of accepted me for who I was and made me realize we had a shared history. That was the sort of turning point when I felt I was allowed to say our history and not your history. Obviously, but that's what it felt. So it was a sort of really interesting kind of acceptance. Them accepting me was I was able to accept myself, I suppose. And there's this incredible moment in the film when I meet a woman on the waterfront in Phnom Penh. And we didn't have it wasn't translated at the time. It was translated for when we edited the documentary. But I heard, and she was staring at me and crying at me, and I thought she was mad or drunk, or she was very heightened in her emotions. But she kept staring at me and she kept saying the word mother, Madai, and I knew that word. I was thinking, oh, okay. And then anyway, in 20 minutes, we went from me thinking she's some mad, crazy person to us literally falling in each other's arms, crying, sobbing, because there was some kind of universal language we were speaking. And it turned out that she was saying, and I needed that. I obviously needed that. And her acceptance of me, or sort of made me realize that, I don't know, it connected with me. I can't really explain how it connected with me, but she was saying, you look like my daughter. They took you away. And it was only afterwards we got that translated. It was a really extraordinary moment. And I'm nearly crying now, but it was one of those moments I will never, ever forget. I was 2.5 months filming that. And then I think the key turning point in that journey was that I fell in love. I fell in love with my fixer, Sonny, and he made it all just really easy, didn't he? He sort of literally held my hand and introduced me to his family, the country. He supported that really difficult journey in a way that made it easy for me. Sadly, we're no longer, but we're still friends. We're still really good friends. So that was, as I said before, I set out to find out the truth. I found out that I didn't have anything except I had gone through this Takama hospital, which at the time was a psychiatric hospital. So that was, going back to John Pilger's point, that was a concrete part of my past. This man the nurse who could confirm that he made up everyone's names, and he said he remembered my mum, which I don't think he did, but he meant it in a good way, I think. So he was there. After that, I thought I'd made my peace with it. For me, it was more about connecting with Cambodian communities in the UK, in France, in America, exploring it safely that way in my own time, because I guess it was a lot to process. But then when I was adopting my children, and I realized I was basically filling in a document saying, where were you born? Why did you move addresses? What are the reasons for moving addresses? And I hadn't got the answer, or it was death, genocide, don't know, death. It's just quite depressing. And also quite a kind of, it was very surreal. I just thought, okay, I can't hide from it again. Enough time has gone past, I suppose, that I can revisit it again, because I'm sure I was suppressing kind of emotional feelings or disappointment that I didn't find my family, I'm sure. So I went back, and I actually wanted to make it more about the French woman that got me out of Cambodia, because I felt that I'd done my story already. and I wanted to shine a light on all the other children that had been born in the East, Cambodia, and ended up in the West. But Channel 4, the broadcasters being broadcasters, they saw my mother as a coup and wanted to use her more in the documentary, making it more authentic. So it then became more about my story again, but I guess to a new audience, a different broadcaster. And the director, Lottie Gammon, did a really incredible job, I think, because I thought, oh, we could do my story again. But it was, I think, important that one of the reasons I went on this journey was that I felt that although I love my mother, admire my mother, I think we have a really good relationship. We can talk about things and the adoption and my past and everything. But I wanted her to see my Cambodian side. And probably she'd been to Cambodia with me on holiday, but but over the 25 years or whatever it was since my first documentary, a lot had changed. I was a mother now, and I really wanted to see her see me as a Cambodian, not an adopted daughter, because that she got in England, kind of thing. Wow. So that was my mission this time. But also, if there was anything new on my birth family search, it would have been a bonus. And then this is when the sort of DNA popped up, which inspired. We went back to the Takamau Hospital, and through traditional research, again, Ty, who was our fixer this time round, who is then become part of the charity, which is amazing. But he was our fixer, and he managed to find, through traditional research and sort of lines of questioning, found the archivist in Kandal, which is where I was supposedly from, that his auntie, I think, had given away a baby at Takamau Hospital. So suddenly it's like, oh my God. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's a long shot, but could Li-Da be this baby? Anyway, we met this lady called Hong Sot, 77. We took a DNA test because there was no way, as your listeners will know, that there are no archives, there's no records pre-1980 that survived. So it's very difficult to find out the truth. And so we took a DNA test. We weren't related, but I was so distraught that for her, for me, for the country, it brought up all this sort of emotion that I'd managed to probably submerge in the 20 years prior to that. And I said to her, look, why don't I help you find your daughter? We agreed that I could be like, her daughter could be like me, out there thriving somewhere with a family, happy. It wasn't all for nothing kind of thing. And the extra dimension to her tragic story was that she had been ill at Takamau Hospital the same time I'd been there. And she had a daughter who she had been told that had died. And then on her sister's or cousin's deathbed, admitted that she had given away her daughter for adoption overseas. And so that was like, oh my goodness, I've got to help this woman find her daughter. I think she's in France, and that's on a recent trip in 2023. I met her again, and her son was there, and he said, oh, by the way, he just sort of said, oh, by the way, she went to France. It's like, what? She went to France? I've got to go start searching there. So it's slowly, it's like for me, it's a really exciting kind of detective story. And that's the way I've chosen to do it, because basically I think there's hope. I think DNA and traditional methods combined, and through locators or family finding experts, I think it is absolutely possible. I'm hoping, I've got an update to tell you about my own search, but I really think that it is possible within my lifetime. I think possibly by next month I might know something more. So to me, I think it's endlessly fascinating, the possibilities that DNA can actually bring people like me and like Hong Sot, who are searching for relatives, and there's no other way to do it because there's no information, adoptees, or just because everything's been destroyed through history.
Yeah. It's almost unfortunate how accepted it just has become, because I feel like so many people have just assumed that there is no other way to find out who they lost, the children they lost, the family members that they lost through the way. It's so apparent. There are so many like Facebook groups out there that are like looking for missing people. And even on and the last episode that I had launched with another adoptee from France, Mira, I had a few DMs after I launched that episode. People were like, when did she leave? Like, my mom had lost another child, like around the same time. And so there's clearly something that is still stuck within many of the Cambodian people who had lost family members. It's just gotten to a point now, 50 years later, that maybe many have unfortunately given up and have accepted that. But clearly, just from the story that you had mentioned with the lady who thought she had lost her child and then she had came to terms with it, and then all of a sudden a glimmer of hope comes up. You just see and feel that missing piece, that longing that they had been hiding for so long. And I think it's just beautiful looking at your journey. You talk about belonging and having these very special, magical experiences with the country and the people of the country. It almost felt like that experience for you was essentially validation that you can claim a Cambodian identity and you have permission to claim a Cambodian identity, regardless of the way that you grew up, regardless of the people and the friends that you have. And I think that is beautiful. That is beautiful to hear, because it seems like that truly unlocked for you another level of what my life purpose can be. You've created the 2 documentaries, and you are also the co-founder of a DNA testing organization called Reconnecting Cambodia, as you also had just mentioned, came from this kind of need to help this woman that you thought maybe would have been your mother. And talk to me about starting this organization. I know that we've already kind of spoke about the mission that you're on, but essentially, where has this organization gone at this point? Where is it currently? And maybe the beginnings as well, how it was formed.
As you said, it was meeting this mother of 77 and desperate to help her because just her story was just so tragic for me. And when I started doing crowdfunding to get Ty, who'd been our fixer, to travel from Siem Reap down to where she was in Kandal, armed with basically DNA tests, so her various people in her family could take it and then get it back to me, and then I could send it off and basically start creating a profile for her. And I realized when I was doing this, and I'm stupid for not realizing it before, but it was that realization. It's like, oh my goodness, the more Cambodians that take a test means that there's more Cambodians in the DNA pool, means that I actually also get a chance to reconnect with my birth family. I thought, so that's where I started thinking, okay, I just need to start a charity. And I met online. I still haven't met them in physically, which is incredible, actually, because we've been going now for 3 years. I met 2 women who had adopted in different countries. One's in the Bay Area, Kari, and the other one, Meta, is based in the Netherlands. And they were both in their own way looking for their adopted Cambodian children's birth parents. And their children had been adopted during sort of late 90s, early noughties. And so, as Mira was saying on your other podcast, there was a lot of falsified adoptions, and then basically there was no information for them to go on. So they had been, one of them had started a database with Family Tree DNA, basically fundraising for tests to take to Cambodia. They test some mums who were looking for their children and tested some other adopted Cambodians. So sort of starting to build a database like this. And she had met Meta already, and and then I wrote, and we were talking about joining forces because we had the same vision. And then I had this incredible, and it happened over 2 hours, but I thought My Heritage is one of the main DNA companies, and they were running this free adoption, free DNA giving to adoptees program. called DNA Quest. So I thought, oh, well, let's see if they'll help us. And within 2 hours, I wrote to the CEO. Within 2 hours, he'd written back and said, I would be honored to help your charity. How many tests do you need? And anyway, so it was like, oh my goodness, we need to actually formalize our charities.
We need to get the paperwork done now.
so that amazing generosity spurred us on to then formulate, and so it's based in the Netherlands, called DNA Cambodia. We then set up with Ty, who was the fixer on my second film, the Khmer family charity organization, KFCO, in Cambodia to run Cambodian operations. And then I'm now setting up Reconnecting Cambodia in the UK. So we're all known as the Reconnecting Cambodia project, but just are in different parts of the world. Membership, admittedly, is slow because what we've discovered, and it's frustrating because we've got this great idea and we think we can help loads of people. We've got free DNA thanks to MyHeritage. And the challenge is that DNA is a big, scary thing. So it's been a slow uptake. There are so many questions about security, data confidentiality, other things like in Cambodia, especially if they think it's a blood test, and it's not, it's a saliva swab in the cheek. There's so many concerns about it. I've realized with the help of a lot of Cambodian communities and leadership within those communities that it is about earning trust. And I just have to be patient, and we have to go very slowly and talk about it we can't go gung-ho. And in some ways, and from the research I've done, we are too early in some ways. But I just think my expectations are maybe it's a 5-10 year project rather than a 1 5-year project. But I would love to be able to offer every single Cambodian family that opportunity to test for free to see if they can find family that they know is missing, but they don't actually know whether they're dead or not. That opportunity to test if they want. But they might not want to, which is fine as well. But I would love to be able to give that opportunity and get it in. I've talked to other NGOs in Cambodia to get it in at the kind of commune level, sort of family planning kind of level. So it's part of that conversation at that level that is sort of in guidance with the national kind of health programming. So those are sort of the ambition of it, but we're still very at the beginning, still trying to earn trust and persuade people DNA is safe and all those kinds of questions.
Yeah, I think the conversation around trust is so important. And quite honestly, it's, from my experience anyway, just interviewing so many different people, the conversation around trust is difficult because a lot of people say that when they look at the Cambodian community, post-war, trust within our own community is quite broken from the war. I don't know if it's a similar kind of mentality in other Cambodian diaspora countries, whether it be Australia or France or whatnot, but there is this phrase I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's called crabs in a bucket. And essentially it is this mentality that Cambodian people post-war find it very difficult to trust each other because post-war they lost trust in their own country. They had to turn their backs on their own people for a 4-year period of time and turn their backs on their friends and their family in order to survive. So that very, very difficult and concentrated period of time, horrific period of time that forced them to do things they don't normally do to survive, has created this long post-war mentality of not being able or finding it very difficult to trust our own people, to trust the country, to trust anybody, even within a family structure. So I think you're right on the head in thinking that potentially this may be not just a 1 to 5 year project, but I'm curious on if you've ever heard of that. But it is something that when you say the word trust within the Cambodian community, it is at least something that I have learned is prevalent.
It's funny, I'd never heard of crabs in a bucket, but yes, I'm very honored to be working with a group of NGOs, local NGOs in Long Beach in preparation for this panel that I'm putting on around the Cambodia Town Film Festival time in September, which I'm really excited about. But it is this sort of campaign. It's the first actually. So it is a campaign of winning over hearts and minds and the trust issue. First there's the DNA, but there's this, and this is why I'm so lucky to be working with the leadership here that have had such a experience with their own Cambodian community, Cambodian American community, saying even they speak the language, have exactly the same experience as many of the people that they're talking to. It took years and years to earn their trust, to just over sort of medical issues, like you need to go to a doctor to do this.
Right.
That was a real sort of eye-opener and sort of home truths and stark reality moment. But that's fine. Now I'm going into it, I think, with eyes wide open. And however, and what's made it very apparent is that, and I knew this anyway, but you have to go to the people that know, the community, people that are already trusted but have earned that trust, and then somehow with their help, then the community's trust as an outsider, because I am an outsider. Yeah, I come from England. No one there knows me. A lady there who's on the panel who is going to do a whole piece around on the trauma aspect and triggering trauma because of the particular Cambodian history that we have experienced, which I don't really have my own trauma, but what we're talking about is really having to think about families and family members we've lost. And I look to the experts in the community to help me with that piece. So I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah, no, it's super exciting. I didn't mean to say that in a way discouraged, but I think I said that in a way that I am so excited that we have somebody who is passionate enough to still want to climb the Everest of this, because it is so important. As I said, there's so many families out there who still kind of live with this question mark. And it is super exciting that you are coming to the Cambodia Town Film Festival, which is happening in September, mid-September. You are talking about this panel, but yeah, as you mentioned, it is the first of kind of promoting, and I think the way that you're approaching it is right on the head, right? How are we going to gain these people's trust? And having just an open dialogue for 40-minute period with anybody who wants to ask any questions, whether it be security or what are you really trying to do, or even just getting to know you. I feel like that's just part of the battle too. They just need to know exactly who's going to be handling their DNA and if it's going to be handled with care. I'm really, really excited. If any of the listeners are listening to this and have family members who are curious or do live with this question mark of whether it be a lost long family member or a child that has been lost through the war or throughout the years, I would highly recommend you coming to the Cambodia Town Film Festival. You can meet Li-Da. She is going to have a panel there to answer any of your questions. And if you wanted, Li-Da, you also mentioned tests will be there, right?
Yes, I will be bringing tests. Yes.
Yeah. So I really, really do believe that if it's any person that I've met in my circle so far who is the right person to really kickstart something like this, Li-Da, I think this conversation that I've had with you in the past hour has just shown me, and I think shown our listeners, that this journey that you've been on has fueled this project that you have, Reconnecting Cambodia. And it's not just somebody who's like, oh, I want to start this out of nowhere. This organization has been an accumulation of the years of you first trying to figure out who you are through belonging, then feeling like, yes, I can claim my identity, dealing with all these different parts of your life to really come to the conclusion that, like, yes, I want to do this for other people. Am I missing anything from the event? I'm so excited that it's finally happening next month.
Well, I can't wait. I'm super excited as well, and thank you for mentioning it. No, maybe just it's on Saturday, the 13th of September at 5 o'clock to 6 o'clock, but there will be food to begin with, so arrive early, 3:30ish, and there'll be testing afterwards. But the main panel and the audience questions will be between 5 and 6, and it's going to be at the United Cambodian Community offices. in off Anaheim Street, I think.
Wonderful. One last question, Li-Da. Now that we have kind of taken a wide perspective and you've been able to kind of look back in the different phases of your life, all the different things that you've accomplished, from the documentary to starting this wonderful organization. I didn't mention this, but you have also started your own company that highlights women's stories as well, right? And all these amazing projects that you've been able to accomplish in the past 50 years. If you were to look at your life and all the things that you've done, what would you say is the mission you are on?
Good question. I think I'm driven by the need to understand and rebuild my Cambodian identity, I think. I think I can answer it in this way. I have never felt more comfortable where I am right now in terms of having had the ability to form a TV company that champions unrepresented voices and women, but also with the charity, it's really given me purpose. It's kind of galvanized all my experiences, and it's led me to this moment where I can help others. I can meaningfully give back. I feel good about that. Even if I don't find my own family, I can help others. And with all those experiences, I'm still building my Cambodian identity and reclaiming that back, because I'm sure it will be a lifelong mission, and it can only get richer, I think, as I go along. But I'm really happy where I am at the moment and excited about the potential of what we can do, and the team I'm working with we can do in terms of rebuilding that kind of healing wall of Cambodia for Cambodians.
Yeah. No, I love that. Li-Da, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing with us and being vulnerable with us. I know it's not always easy kind of digging back into our childhoods, but I think it's a very important conversation to be had, especially for those out there and other adoptees out there listening. We have international listeners, not just within the US, but Australia, France, Canada, all different countries, which I am sure there are other adoptees out there who are looking for these types of conversations so they don't feel alone. Li-Da, where can people find you and your projects if they want to find you?
I have a website called reconnectingcambodia.org. On Facebook, we're a Reconnecting Cambodia project, LinkedIn, Reconnecting Cambodia project. And we have this amazing hub that we've just launched to sort of be a center for resources of family finding, called Cambodia's Lost Children. So we're all over Facebook, really, and then the website.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, as I said, I've said it once and I'll say it again, but next month, September 13th, you are going to be having your panel, Reconnecting Cambodia. As I said, if any of the listeners do have family members who would be interested in either getting their questions answered about the security of DNA testing, but also doing DNA testing themselves, definitely come out to the Cambodia Town Film Festival happening in September. Not only are you going to be able to check out this panel, but you get to see other movies and
you will be there.
I will be there as well, moderating the opening film. So definitely come check it out. And if you had any questions for Li-Da, you can definitely reach out on the website and or come September 13th to her panel. Li-Da, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Oh, thank you, Dorothy, so much for what you do as well. This podcast is incredible.
Thank you. Thank you so much.